Hello, and welcome to PCI Webinars. Today's webinar, The Give and Take of Criticism, with Pat Wagner. Pat and her husband, Leif Smith, own Pattern Research, Inc., a 44-year-old training, research, and consulting business. She has worked for libraries and higher education as an educator and consultant since 1978, focusing on behavioral and organizational skills that support institutional and personal success. Her specialties include conflict management, customer service, leadership, marketing, supervision, project management, and ethics. Pat is a frequent speaker at state and national library conferences and has worked with libraries and library-related organizations in 48 states and Canada, from small rural storefronts to the largest urban and academic libraries. She has 2 published books related to libraries and has contributed chapters and articles to other library-related books and magazines. She is known for her good-humored and practical presentations. Coming to you now from sunny Denver, Colorado, it's Pat Wagner.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Anne, and thank you folks for joining us today as well. One of the ways that we've put together this program is for you to have takeaways to share with the people in your institutions, and also some homework as well that I hope that you have time to do. Every program that I do has a key idea, and the key idea today is that accepting and giving feedback is a dialogue, not a monologue. And if you notice, we start with the idea of accepting feedback, so it's actually about first being the receiving end of criticism before we can really tackle mastering the giving end of criticism, different kinds. Um, and another part of it, which was alluded to in one of the quotes that we all got to see before the program was formally started, is that most feedback should be positive. And I'm not someone who's for phony grade inflation or phony self-esteem or anything like that, but unless you're in a very particular situation where you have a lot of training and background in accepting criticism, or it's a life and death situation of some kind, most people are overwhelmed if most of what they get in terms of feedback is fixing them or criticism or negativity or so on. And after a while, they just tune you out. Also, it doesn't reach the goal that we have of behavior change. So that's a second key idea that comes out of the program today. Several outcomes. First of all, that hopefully the information we have will help you plan that meeting when you have to have that difficult conversation with a coworker, an employee, or somebody who is using the library. That you are inspired to understand how important it is to prepare for those situations, to give it the same attention that you would give anything else that's important. A lot of people, I think, have an avoidance of being able to give and receive criticism, so they adopt sort of a shoot, ready, aim methodology. Close your eyes, throw mud at the wall, and run away real fast. Tends not to work very well. Uh, Being able to do this well, getting the result you want, and maintaining a good relationship with the other person means that we're going to be talking about things like writing and practice and research as well. Uh, for us, being able to develop those strategies to really think through how can you keep calm, relaxed, and interested when someone is either giving you feedback or you have to give someone else feedback. And I can say from personal experience, it does get better as time gets on. And then making respectful feedback part of the culture, making the environment of your institution such that people know that it's okay to, in effect, tap someone on the shoulder and say, I need to give you some feedback about what happened the other day or what happened this morning, or, I was just looking at the website and I think it needs some fixes and wanted to talk to you about that. And also making it easier for other people to come up to you as well. Several things we're going to talk about. And what surprises some people is we're first going to talk about foundations of respect and trust, meaning how do we create that environment, that culture within our institution, our library, and the greater institutions we serve, so that it becomes the norm to be able to give and receive criticism. What is constructive criticism? What's the general description of it? how to accept feedback. Remember, we're starting with accepting, how to give feedback, and typical mistakes we make and next steps as well. So, first of all, let's talk about that idea of foundations of respect and trust. How do we create a workplace that makes it easier for people to be able to give and receive useful, respectful criticism? So, think about this. If you have some things going on in your library, and this is a great discussion question if you're watching this recorded with other people from your workplace, how does your library and greater institution create a work culture, a context of respect and trust? How are they treated by people up and down the food chain? And so let's talk about that a little bit. When we talk about the word respect, what does that mean? In concrete terms, it means to me that I'm treated with civility and courtesy at all times by all people. Please, thank you, hello, goodbye. And I have visited literally of hundreds of libraries and greater institutions around the United States and Canada. And you almost can tell in the first 10 minutes that you're in the building what the culture is. Do people look up from their work and say hello as if they mean it? If I'm walking through the halls, hi, how are you? Are you finding what you need? And do I observe people from all backgrounds being treated equally? Which brings me to the second one. I'm treated as a social equal. So one of my secret things I like to do, and I'll tell you this, don't tell anyone, when I'm invited into a library and I have the grand tour, sometimes by a director or a manager, and they're showing me all the new maker spaces and the new collection and the new technology and the new buildings, carpeting, that's a big deal these days, the new carpeting. I'm not looking at those things, folks. I'm watching how the person who's taking me around is interacting with people, particularly if I'm in an academic library or there's children around or there's people who look like they're down on their luck. Does that person with me stop and say hello, good morning? Do they greet the staff regardless of the status of the staff? That feeling that I receive the same courteous treatment as anyone else, and if there are concerns and feedback, they're acknowledged and addressed in a timely fashion. People don't bring up mistakes I made 4 years ago, goodness sakes. So when I talk about a respectful environment, these are some of the concrete things. And if you feel that your library or institution does a good job at that, this is a time to brag a little bit. So these are some of the concrete examples, but what are other concrete examples of being treated with respect? And feel free to use the side chat and I'll share with the audience if you like. One of the exercises I do in workshops when we're all in the same room physically is I'll ask people at the small tables to come up with their concrete examples of what it's like being treated with respect. What I find interesting is that usually 60% of what people write and talk about are in agreement. There's a consensus, but 40% are new to those folks. So this is an interesting exercise, and what I'd like to do is to share some of those ideas that people have come up with over the years. Okay, some we've already covered. Say hello every day and address me by my name. That I get to meet with you without your taking phone calls or interrupting me. That you let me finish my sentences. That I do see some of my ideas implemented, and if they're not, I know why not. And I was doing this at a workshop in Kansas a couple of weeks ago, and this issue came up, and one of the library people there talked at length, in a very interested way, about how they created a culture so that everybody knew that if they came up with an idea and it wasn't implemented, they would know why so they could improve their ability to give feedback in the future. That people are included in decision making, the rules apply to everyone, you pay attention when I'm giving presentations, I get a turn running meetings. All these things are important because what I find is that after a while, frustration and anger builds up if people feel that they're being ignored. And when the criticism comes out, it comes out in this big angry burst, sometimes in the middle of a public meeting, sometimes in an evaluation or a yearly review, and it's all out of proportion with what's going on. And people say, oh my goodness, why was that person so angry or defensive? Well, to me, it's a symptom. It's a symptom that they have a very poor expectation that they're going to be heard. So I take it seriously, not just what's going on with that one person, but what's going on with the institution as well. And then there's this word trust. Trust to do what? Um, and some people use the word trust uh, as a intransitive verb. Okay, I'm showing off now with my grammar. Like, um, I trust you. Well, that's kind of overarching. But if it's a transitive verb, then you say trust to do what specifically? So here's some of the things that I think are behaviors that describe trustworthy. That I feel that if I'm working with you personally or the institution, people don't show up in bad moods pouting, and I have to walk around, with my breath held like, oh my goodness, is Pat in a good mood today? Is it okay to talk to her? That I like the idea of predictably that we can talk to anyone in our workplace. And when I have had employees in our little business, we make that part of the culture. And if people pout, they're called on it. I can do that. As the boss, say no, no. You can't just say nothing's wrong and then walk into your office and slam the door. We're too small an institution for us to get away with that kind of thing. Commitments kept. And this became an issue a few weeks ago, talking with the city government here in Colorado, where I was talking to actually the county commissioners, and they were all new in the job. There had been kind of a clean sweep of the politicians in their county, and it was a rural county. And one of the people said, we have lost the trust of the citizens in this county because the previous administration would make big promises and they would never be fulfilled. So being able to keep commitments, saying things like, we were promised a raise last year and it never happened. That we were told that they were going to clean up the storage room and it never happened. We were told that we would get new computers and it never happened. And so after a while, people, as I say here, feel like, nope, um, they don't get their support that they want, that the people above them in the food chain aren't on their side. Few surprises. This is a big one. Someone told me once, and this was in California in a smaller library, and this woman happened to be the head of the children's department of her community library, that the way she found out about big changes being made in policies in the library is a library user, a patron, told her in the vegetable section, like she was in the vegetables, picking out melons and doing the usual thing. And one of the patrons came up and said, oh, hey, Madge, I hear they're making all these changes in the library, and started listing all of them. And she went back to the director and she was pretty ticked off and said, why am I the last to know about these things? And then finally telling people the truth. This just came up again about an issue maybe 3 days ago with a library that I was working with in Pennsylvania. And one of the trustees on the board of trustees said, when is it that we're going to tell people we're going to have trouble with the budget, and how are we going to tell them? I said, tell them now and tell the truth. Let them as adults make decisions. So this word trust is again something I take seriously. If people are having trouble with giving and receiving criticism, that might be one of the reasons. So when we think of these words, respect and trust, what's something that you could improve, or the people you know could improve in terms of your own library's work culture, the context regarding trust and respect? Because what we have to deal with is, do these problems affect our ability to give and receive useful criticism on a day-to-day basis? So what's constructive criticism? What does constructive criticism mean? I think that's kind of an interesting issue. Constructive criticism. Well, first of all, it's about current issues, that unless we have a specific agreement with a person, for example, let's say, I'll take our marriage, because my husband and I have been together for like a long time, 43 years. I got to count my fingers. And we've been in business together over 40 years. So let's say that my husband said to me, or I said to my husband, this is better, that I promise, sweetheart, that I'm going to make sure that I get the deposit in the bank in a timely fashion. And we have a big serious talk about that because I missed getting it in a timely fashion, which caused kind of repercussions for us. And then I do it again. Well, there's a promise in place, a contract as it would be in place saying I would stop doing that. Now I did it again. But my husband, nonetheless, would still bring up recent issues, not would say, well, 25 years ago you did that. I hear people do that when they're giving criticism. That there's no surprises because we don't want to blindside people by coming up with stuff that they don't know about. Old Russia did that, the communist government. That was a way they made excuses to throw people in the gulag. And I think some people are like that. It's like a gotcha. We didn't tell you this was a rule. We didn't tell you this is a problem. We didn't give you the information about fix it. And now we hammer people. And I resent it personally when someone says, well, you should have known. It should be obvious to everyone. Well, it's not obvious to everyone. People are raised differently. Their backgrounds in their workplaces are different. Often they get not very good orientation. They don't get the policies and procedures. So please don't tell me it should have been known. Sometimes these issues are heartbreaking and cause someone to leave a workplace because everyone, very self-righteously, in my opinion, sort of says, well, you should have known that that was going to be a problem. We focus on the future. We focus on what we need to have happen next. And this is very much a key issue in terms of constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is what we call future-paced. It's future-focused, and it's about next time, or instead, let's do this. You don't even have to mention what's wrong. We'll say, next time, let's do this instead. Next time, let's make sure that we get the deposit on time, meaning that you have to be at the bank 15 minutes before they close, or otherwise it goes into the next day. Next time, let's survey the parents before we develop a series of programs for their kids that it turned out nobody wanted, right? Next time. And using next time and instead, again, tends to make people feel less like victims. It makes them feel less defensive because we're not focusing on what they did wrong. We're focusing on what they can do right next time. And it kind of works on things like productivity. And productivity is usually about the quality of what somebody does, the quality of the work they do, and the timeliness, is it done in a timely fashion, and the costs. And while we do it, we have to be thinking about trust and respect. So we want to lower that level of theater that goes on. And it's a public library or it's an academic library, whatever. It's just a library. It's doubtful that mistakes people make are going to intentionally cause the death of a puppy, So we want to take the drama out and stick to the facts, not just our emotional response to the facts. And what we know and what we reasonably believe to be true if we don't have actual physical evidence about that. And that's what constructive criticism is. Constructive criticism, when done well, doesn't raise somebody's blood pressure, doesn't raise a pulse for a reasonable person. It's like, oh, thank you, I needed that information, and let's go off to the next thing. One of the things that comes from cognitive and behavioral science, plus thousands of years of human behavior, is we have no power over the past, so let's focus on the future. Some people seem to live in the past. They love bringing up old stuff, which, again, is another reason people kind of tune them out. So a couple things we have to think about, first of all, is if we're going to be giving and receiving criticism, is it a personal issue or a personnel issue? Personal issues tend to be none of our business. Personnel issues have issues having to do with productivity and things that we have written down. For example, personal doesn't affect the customer, doesn't affect how other people do their work. And we're talking about the average person, the reasonable average person, not someone who is reasonably can be called hypersensitive to something going on. Like somebody's working in tech services and somebody walks through the room in what everyone else thinks is a normal fashion, and that person says, oh, they shouldn't clunk their boots so much. Well, I'm sorry, it's a workplace and it's tech services and people will be delivering boxes of books and sometimes the books fall over and sometimes you kind of deliver them with a clunk. It's going to happen. So I don't think it's completely reasonable that says everyone's got to wear, stockings or just slippers and tiptoe around all the time. Um, is it something done on one's own time? Well, legally, we probably don't even have a say in that, but also it is kind of none of our business. It doesn't have to do with productivity. People are still getting their work done on time with a reasonable cost and at an agreed upon level of quality. It doesn't really affect other people. Again, the clunking boots or something. It's like, no, it's not really affecting people. And it might be something intangible. A look on someone's face, a tone and voice, sometimes that's personal. Sometimes it's hard to say if it's professional or not, but most of the time, there's a lot of things people complain about. It's kind of none of our business. It's just, we're humans. We're going to annoy each other sometimes. This is America. We have a right to annoy each other a little bit sometimes. On the other hand, if it affects the job description and it's addressed in the job description, like I'm not getting the work done that I was hired to do, and here's the job description and here's the contract, right? It does affect other people's productivity in a very concrete way, like missed deadlines. I'm late on getting my stuff done, and other people, therefore, are late. The domino effect. The mission of the workplace. So you're rude to people and at a front desk, and people aren't coming into the library. Duh. That's certainly affecting our mission. A big one with a bullet, I should have outlined this one in red, that it really impacts the library customer, the library user. And that almost should be the first one. That's why there's some behaviors that might be, let's say, permitted in a back room that are not permitted at the front desk. And I'm sorry, that's just the fact that it's more likely to directly impact the library user. It can be measured and described, and concrete things like being late for work. Um, Pat's supposed to be editing brochures for the marketing department, and there were 20 errors in the last one that she sent out. That's a good example of something. Maybe there are rules in the larger workplace, in your community or in your institution that the library serves, and sometimes it outright breaks the law. Yes, you might not be able in Florida to keep pythons in the bathroom as personal pets. I get that. I think that might be a good law. What do you think? So, we talked a little bit about constructive criticism. We've talked a little bit about the environment that we're trying to create. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of accepting feedback. And we're starting again with accepting feedback because it's the behavior we want to model to other people. So let's start with what's difficult about accepting feedback. And if you're watching this program live, if you want to send us some stuff, and yes, I won't be, as been pointed out to me before, I won't be giving people names or information of the folks who are commenting in this program. But trust me, I bet if anyone does choose to do this, it will be universal. So if we were in a room together, I would be saying to people, could you please write down in your group what's difficult about accepting feedback? And then what I would do is put it on a board for all to see. So we have kind of an accumulation of the ideas of people in the room. So what's difficult about accepting feedback? And I'm going to share a list. And if you think of something that's not on the list, feel free to join in. So, accepting feedback can be difficult. I don't like feeling defensive, hurt feelings, really being able to listen to the other person's concerns, not reacting to emotional attacks. It's really hard for me if the other person is yelling for me not to yell back. That's an issue that I have. That's sort of a problem. That the person is repeating old complaints, stuff that maybe doesn't even have anything to do with the thing at hand. It can confuse me. Like, what are they yelling at me about? Why are they bringing up stuff that I thought was settled years before? For me, when people do that, I don't know how it hits you, but I can feel a sense of betrayal. Like, why are you bringing up things that I thought that we had fixed, or things that we can't fix? So, for example, if you're a supervisor, a manager, a director, or a trustee in your library, And you as a group, as an institution, made a decision. Maybe it wasn't the best decision in the world, probably wasn't the worst decision, but you made the decision. So you moved the library to a new location. You changed in a significant way the focus of the library, maybe from focusing only on books and literature and having a library where everything was very quiet and there wasn't a lot of activities, to a library that's really a lot of programming and people playing musical instruments and people having dance contests and doing a whole bunch of stuff, and not a lot of it has to do with books or fine literature. But that decision was made 10 years ago, and the library is now packed from morning till night. So it seems that our customers sort of like it. Yeah, some of the people are ticked off still, and that's okay. But just bringing it up over and over again isn't going to change it. Oh, the person is making the issue personal. You know, the you people, or you did this to me, or you did that to me, or I should expect it from people like you. You know, people like you who have a master's degree, you don't understand what it's like to be a worker bee. Or people like you who never bothered to choose to get your master's degree, and look at you now. I mean, every way that a human being can insult or demean or diminish another human, people do, regardless of their position. Do you think that really makes it easy to give or receive criticism? The person has a laundry list, and that's sort of hard to take. You know, they have, well, let me give you the 33 things you've done wrong, and there's no opportunity for resolution. What is called in behavioral science and in Gestalt therapy, it's called a hit and run. That somebody yells at you and then walks away, or they yell at you and they really don't have anything you're supposed to do differently. They just want to vent. Unfortunately, according to the folks I hang around with, venting doesn't seem to work. It's a short-term catharsis, but problems aren't solved. And eventually we should be able to solve problems. So in accepting feedback, we have to be extra careful about keeping calm, because we're going to be modeling the behavior that we want other people to do when they're giving and receiving criticism. This particularly applies if you're a director, a manager, a supervisor, someone who other people look up to. Maybe you're older than other folks in your workplace. Maybe you've been there for a longer period of time. You know, it builds respect for people. And the ideal is people say, wow, I want to be like you. I want to be like this person who was so good at giving ideas and so good when people criticize them. I'm kind of going through an interesting issue right now because here in Colorado, in Denver, there's a very contentious uh, initiative, referendum going through. And Denver and Colorado have more referendums, I think, on the ballot than anybody on the planet. I mean, it's amazing sometimes. This particular one is an issue having to do with homelessness. And wow, in my little neighborhood bulletin board, whoa, are people, you know, speaking their mind and stuff. And some people are really rude and angry and nasty. So I'm trying to stay calm and I'm trying to be the voice of reason and I'm trying to be kind. And if someone criticizes me, I thank them. I do all the stuff I know I'm supposed to do. I try to model the behavior. Well, you know, it's very gratifying because people are emailing me publicly and privately, complimenting me on how I'm presenting the facts and saying, wow, this is good. And they're trying with, I think, some success to model this sort of let's be calm, let's just present the facts and stuff. So, you know, it can have an effect on other people for sure. So here we are, accepting feedback. Wow. First of all, what we need to do is learn how to focus our own emotional state. And I think everybody has, how would you say, everybody has strategies they've used over the years. For example, when I was a little girl and I had temper tantrums, my mother taught me, she said, when you feel like you're out of control, excuse yourself from the room, walk away, go to the bathroom, and run cold water over your wrists or splash cold water on your face. My mother was really into splash cold water on your face as a solution for 80% of the world's problems. You know, if she'd be watching TV and seeing two politicians arguing, she'd say, someone needs to call a break and splash cold water on their face. I'm not kidding. And you know what? It works. And I have developed some methods where I can either leave or calm down and say, just a minute, leave the room, come back, and like be okay. Another thing that has helped me is the idea of having rituals around an iconic object. Like going into a meeting, and this, by the way, was a suggestion I received from a woman who's a very famous psychologist here in Colorado, a woman named Lori Wise, Weiss, who's published a zillion books. But Lori taught me the power of the icons. So she said, if you're going to have a difficult phone call, for example, with where you know it's going to be a lot of giving and receiving of criticism, and you want to be calm while someone is giving you unpleasant feedback, have a photo of a loved one. You know, your spouse, your partner, your kid, your pet, so that you can be looking at that and thinking while the person might be upset. Bring a treasured gift with you. I think that's why sometimes you go into some people's offices or work areas and there's all these little things that make you feel better. I once had to go into a very, very, very difficult meeting where I knew that I was going to be raked over the coals and I needed to stay calm. So I made sure when I got dressed that morning that I was wearing a piece of jewelry that my mother gave me. And you know, it was a comfort and it helped me calm down. It was sort of a touchstone for folks. We once had a woman who, and this is funny but true, it was a client that was a business, and the secretary to the owner of the business came up to me just before the board meeting in a panic because she had at the last minute been given the assignment to present the treasurer's report. The treasurer had decided not to be there at the meeting with good cause because it really looked bad. And the owner said, hey, you're a competent person. I want you to present the treasurer's report to everyone else. And she was terrified. She said, everyone's going to criticize me and yell at me, even though I had nothing to do with this. And I've never done anything like this before. She was really upset. So I said, when's the meeting? She said, in 5 minutes. Okay. So I said, let's go to your desk. And I knew this was many years ago. She'd have a letter opener. So I said, bring the letter opener with you and make that your icon. Make it your King Arthur's sword so that you can use that if you're feeling afraid. Just grab your letter opener. Well, it turned out she just didn't grab the letter opener, but if someone started criticizing her, she would start stabbing the letter opener into the top of the table, was damaging the table and the trustees, and all the trustees were leaning way back in their chairs. And she gave, what I was told by the owner, a terrific presentation of the information. And the trustees were really nice to her and said, wow, that was really great. And we understand the problems are not yours and everything like that. And the owner said, Pat, it was a great idea, but I've told her not to bring weapons into trustee meetings sometimes. But we all have these things we can do that maybe calm us down. Maybe we don't need a sword. To be able to listen without interruption, boy, is that hard for me. That I have to show respect for what the other person is saying, even if they are being unreasonable or emotional, unless it's at the point that I feel personally attacked over time. I have to learn to be quiet. And even when they're done, to be able to say, is there anything more? Right? And I have learned, and this has helped me so much, whether I agree or disagree, you start with a thank you. Thank you for telling me something I needed to know. Should start any conversation when you're getting feedback. You can, if the feedback is given in public, to request privacy. And you don't even have to give an excuse. To say, I would like to continue this in private. And if the person says no, you, in my belief, have the right to say, okay, when you have time to say this in private, I will be available. Thank you. and then go back to work or do anything. You don't have to stand there in a public hallway with people walking back and forth while this person's yelling at you or giving you feedback that they're not yelling at you, but it's private. It's about personnel issues or something. And you should always, in any workplace, be able to request a third party to be there, just so there's a third party who will be able to report, take notes, and having a witness tends to calm all the parties down. Years ago, an elected official said that he would invite high school civics classes to all the city council meetings in his town because when the young people would show up for the meeting, it immediately meant that all the adults in the room, including the elected officials, would be on their best behavior. I always like that. So, when you're accepting that feedback, you can acknowledge it. You don't have to immediately react or respond. You don't have to make things worse. You don't have to pour, fuel on the fire. Ask what they want you to do instead. Future pays the other person. Yeah, how can I fix this? I just had an incident like this where I screwed up on something, and the first words out of my mouth were, "Thank you. How can I fix this?" And you know what? I saw all the anger in the other person kind of drain out of their body. It was like, oh, it future paced them so we could talk about whatever needed to be done. And if you are criticized for what the people you supervise do, you have to take responsibility for that. It's bad supervision to blame the people you supervise because it is your responsibility. I had a person who was an employee, not very long, who went to a store and was rude to the people in the store. She was there to buy some stuff for our office and was rude to someone. The assistant manager, who knew us very well, was upset enough about it. He called me up, and I said, "I'm very sorry. It's a new employee, but I should be on top of it and made it better known to her that that behavior is not acceptable. Thank you for telling me. I need to do something about it." And I have to say, when she came back in, it was not a pleasant conversation. And I think that was basically her last 10 minutes working for us. We want to be able to set resolutions, not just an open-ended, you should be better. I just actually went through it with someone where I said, what would be the deadline you'd want me to adhere to next time so I don't mess up again? And it was interesting, they didn't have a deadline. So I said, it's going to be kind of hard for me to make you happy next time if I don't know. So I finally eked out a deadline from them. And take the concern and the person seriously. Am I doing better this time? Just went through this with something with my husband about a business-related thing where he justifiably criticized me for something, and I was able to say, okay, am I doing it better now? Not addressing these things and following up to the other person feels like you have dismissed everything they've said, and it's like a black hole. You don't have to keep bringing things up. I'm not talking about, the beating the dead horse thing, but you can say, we haven't talked about this for a while. How am I doing? Sometimes as simple as that. Here we go. So this was something I learned from a woman who was a state librarian, that when she was dealing with people who were criticizing her on a big project, she said, okay, what will satisfy you? And she said, sometimes it was necessary when people gave me big generalized criticism of something I was doing as a state librarian, I needed them to get specific. And sometimes it was often something we could fix. Like, that initiative will cause books to be lost on the courier service. What would satisfy you? It would satisfy me if I knew that I would be reimbursed for books that are lost. Great. We'll get some money together, which she did. And that way, if this happens, you'll have a fund. Will that satisfy you? Right? So it kind of nails people down who generally criticize, but not in a way that's useful. We want to kind of teach other people how to give constructive criticism as well. So now we have the giving feedback, giving criticism. I have to say that I learned to give criticism the best for the years that I was a college instructor. I was a college instructor, not tenured faculty. I was adjunct for 10 years at 5 different schools in total. And for 7 years, I taught at the same state college. And probably, so that was 7 years, 3 times a year, 21 semesters, and pretty much every semester someone was flunking. And I'd have to have the "you're flunking" talk and talk about what needed to be done. People screamed at me, they yelled, they cried, they tried to blackmail me, they threatened me. I learned how to be specific and relaxed and future paced. And without exception, at the end of the meeting, the person would say, "Thank you for treating me with respect. Thank you for showing me what we can do. This has been very painful for me, but I feel like I can go on," and so on. So I've been there and it's hard, but yes, the more you practice, the easier it can be. So, what do people tell me they find difficult about giving feedback? Well, emotionally exhausting, that there's so many conflicting feelings about going through this. I feel guilty. I feel personally responsibility. I'm upset because they're upset. They start crying. I start crying, right? I suddenly find out I was absolutely wrong about everything. Oh my goodness. What if I'm really wrong? What if I hurt them? What if something bad happens? Um, I tend to stammer and babble. That was personal to me because if I'm upset, I talk too much, and that's saying a lot because I usually talk too much under normal circumstances. Uh, I really want a laundry list. I want to look at that person that I might be really angry at and say, not only that, and then go back like 40 years worth of stuff. Boy, that was an agreement we had to make in our marriage. And it's something that I would find myself doing if I didn't really prepare and practice beforehand and really understand that I had one thing that I got to say, one issue that I got to deal with, not 100. Unless we were talking about a specific pattern of behavior that was part of a pre-agreed agreement or a contract of some kind. It's really hard if you don't already have a good relationship with the person. And I tell people who come to me for advice, I ask them how good a relationship, and if they don't have a very good relationship and it's not criticism or feedback that's on a deadline, I say maybe you have to build that up first before you can criticize them. Like in our neighborhood, we had a neighbor who was, I'll just say, a problem neighbor. And before I felt I could address the problems with their behavior and how it was impacting me and other neighbors, I had to have a better relationship with them. And what was interesting? As I built a better relationship with them, the bad behaviors they were doing were going away. And later, when we talked about it, the bad behavior, which was letting their dog be in their yard barking pretty much day and night 24/7, was because they felt threatened by some burglaries that had happened in the neighborhood and felt other people weren't sympathetic to them. And when I stepped forward and made friends with them and talked about things like security and how we can all help each other and protect each other, they actually, without anybody saying anything, without me saying anything specific, took their dog in the house. So you never know. There's some positive things that can happen. Now, this is the one that I think is the most serious about why giving feedback can be difficult. And this is something I run into in almost all the classes I teach in supervision and management. Concern that my workplace won't back me up. That's a tough one, isn't it? When you can't trust the people who are supposed to be behind you. And usually, if it's criticism or action that needs to be taken by someone at a higher level, particularly a director or dean, but also managers as well, people in the administrative level. One of the things I ask them is you need to go back to the people above you in the food chain and ask, will you defend me? Will you support me? This is the evidence I have. Because what happens if you are told that you have the legitimate authority to start a disciplinary cycle, for example, with someone, and then that's undermined by someone on the board of trustees? I tell people if that happens, that's a reason to start looking for a new job. You can't do your job fairly if you have to constantly worry that you're not being supported by the people behind you. That's a really, really big issue for me. And then the problem is it's not something concrete. And then we have to keep thinking, is it a personal issue? Is it a vendetta on the part of some people? Or it's something that we can say, we know this is happening because of this. Because how will you know, if you don't have concrete evidence when someone's doing something wrong, how will you know when they're doing it right? What can you tell them? That becomes a problem for sure. So what is one of the key things, and I've mentioned this before, but I hope that one of the key ideas that you bring out of this program is the idea of practice, 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 practice. And there's a library director out there, a former library director named Jamie LaRue from here in Colorado. And he and I have taught a program together, and he's done it on his own about firing people. And he told me a story years ago about how they realized that they had several people in their library, the administrative team, including a branch manager who really needed to be disciplined and probably terminated. And this was the administrative team was a great team of people, worked well together. It took them 5 weeks, meeting twice a week, for everyone to write down what they needed to say, become comfortable with saying it, and practicing it and refining it with other people so that the delivery was not something they had to worry about during the meeting. And it took practice. I have a degree in theater, and I'll tell you, it really helped when I had to deal with these issues, because when I had to meet with the people who I had to give an F for the semester from, I would practice with my husband first and go through it with him. And he'd give me some really good feedback about my tone of voice and so on, and words I was using. So even as I was upset and emotionally distraught about doing this to someone, I really felt that I had the details down. And that's why we don't want you to do a hit and run, for you to really think about what you say and how to say it, write it down, and such. So here's some things about giving feedback having to do with the content. Will feedback make the situation better? We call it the ecology test. How will giving feedback about this specific issue improve the behavior of that particular person? How will everybody be able to know what's going on? So that's kind of like a good issue. Another thing is, if someone else did this, would they receive the same feedback? Another thing is, if someone else is, and when we say if someone else did something, what would happen and how would it happen? Another thing is, if someone else did this, how would we, what kind of language would we use? Would we have a different approach? I think that's sort of an important thing. Is it something that is an established agreement, or is it something new? And if it's something new, are we blindsiding the person, or is it something brand new that we haven't had a chance to talk to them about? Are we focusing on what's happened in the future? How can we describe the resolution in terms that people will understand? We want to avoid using abstract terms. That's so important. How do we avoid using abstractions and dealing things? So that's part of what's going on with this particular giving content that means that people will listen to what's being said. So these are some of the context-based things on giving feedback that are important. So here are some examples. I want you to be at your desk ready to greet and help our customers when the library opens in the morning at 9 a.m. I don't want to hear any more complaints from parents or coworkers about how you talk to children. I want you to complete the reports and damaged books and have them on my desk by 3 p.m. every Friday, every week. I don't want you to comment on the books our customers check out, even if it's a compliment. Maybe it's a book they hate, and the problem is that they won't be able to deal with it. I want you to say good morning to other employees, so please say please and thank you, and refrain from making sarcastic comments. So we're going to practice. We're going to give feedback in private. That's an important thing. We are going to base what we say on I statements rather than this is what you're doing and third-hand reports. You're going to say either I know this, I have witnessed this myself, I have heard this, I have seen this. We have very specific information that we can document, where we have signed complaints from 10 people that this is what you've done, not just a whisper in the air. The whole thing is not to punish the person, but to focus on the future. This is what we're going to do. And then we want to stick to the point. Not the now that I have you here, which is the Pat Wagner way in the old days before I knew to do this. Here are 50 other things that you messed up on, right? That the important thing is we're going to stick to the point, stick to the point. So, what are some typical mistakes that people make? And let's start with accepting feedback. Accepting feedback. So the first thing about accepting feedback is we have to make taking a specific action a priority and how we respond to feedback. One of the best things I heard was from a new director who had made massive changes how her library was operating. And even though I personally think that um, what happens is important, that I personally think that um, what she did was the right thing to do. Nonetheless, there were some of her employees who were very resistant. So she actually had a mutiny from one of her branches. And she called me to talk about it. And it was a few years ago, and I was tired. And I was like, oh, just heck, fire them all. She went, oh, come on, Pat, that's stupid. And she was right. That was her feedback to me. And you know what she did is she closed the branch for the morning, went in there with a couple of people from her admin team, including HR, and sat down and said, I am here to hear your complaints. And she said something I thought was wonderful. You are going to give me my marching orders. I am going to hear what your concerns are, and we're going to talk about how we can make things better. Even within the context that we're probably not going to go back to the old way because these are the reasons it didn't work very well. And she sat there and she made lists and so on. And then as soon as she left, she started taking action. And she would report back to the group the actions she was taking based on their criticism and feedback. And she said, yeah, it felt like a feeding frenzy, a feeding frenzy, because of the level of emotionality in the room at the time. But she said it really helped to sit and take notes. I was taking them seriously, and I did. And she said, wow, I got some really valuable feedback. And this was not an inexperienced director, someone who had had 20 years previous experience, but not making the kind of changes at the level that she was making. Not exhibiting defensive behavior. Still hands, square your body. Think about if you were really interested in what the other person was saying and wanted to make sure you didn't miss anything. How would you look? What would be your posture, look on your face, and so on? I think that's really, really, really important. Um, I'm lucky in a way because my hearing is going away for various reasons as I get older. So even if I really disagree with the person, I have to lean forward and really look them in the face and focus on what they're saying. Otherwise, I'm going to miss most of it. So I think I look like a more interested listener than I did before I was losing my hearing. But making notes is an important thing, being able to write things down. Not inviting feedback. Not inviting feedback. Tell me more. Is there anything else that you want to say? What's something else I can do to fix this issue or fix this problem? I'm so sorry. When we go through the fix and I issue the document, I'll send a copy of it to you first to see if you have any comments or changes. Now, when we're giving feedback, what are the things that people are most likely to do most of the time? The first thing they do most of the time is the idea of dwelling on the past. And again, I can't tell you how important it is to keep things future focused. Not specific enough. We use words that are code words, like you're not being respectful to people at the front desk. I have no idea what that means. You're not being a team player. I don't know what that means. So what I need to have people say, and I think this is kind of a crutch I use that works very well. If for example, that woman I ended up firing for being rude to a vendor's clerk, I was able to say, we treat people in our office with respect, by which I mean we say good morning, please, and thank you to everyone. We treat people as our social equal, meaning we hold out their hand, shake their hand about things, and on and on and on. And it was interesting. The person didn't deny what she did. She actually felt in the conversation that she had the right to treat certain people a certain way. Well, yeah, 5 minutes, she was gone. And then finally, that thing about too many issues. Too many issues. And it confuses people. They don't know what your priorities are. they don't know which is important, which is you just rambling and venting, So what we want to do is set people up for success. And one way that we set people up for success is giving something to them that they can fix so we can have a shared success. In working with a group of municipal folks, this is at a city council, including the library director, recently, this became an interesting issue because a group of people were working together not very well. And we talked at length about how do we set the group up for success? Let's pick something small to do that we're pretty sure everyone's going to do well, and then we can build from there. Sometimes in giving criticism, that's what we have to do. We might have a big, enormous, complex issue we want to talk to them about that's going to take time and effort to change. Maybe if we have the time, if there's not a critical deadline, let's agree on something small first that we can fix so people can have that kind of shared success tomorrow with what they're doing. Some other situations that are important: triangulation. Don't allow person A to come to you and say, well, this is a big secret, but everybody here in the workplace is really upset with how Pat's, but of course I can't name names, so you have to talk to Pat for us. Nope. The second thing is that when you have the formal review, it really should be anticlimactic, by which I mean there's no surprises of what we're going to talk about. In fact, ideally for me, it should not just be, okay, we're reviewing things we know about already, but it should be a celebration of all the things we're doing better than before. So, what's next? This to me is an important issue. For you and for the people you work with, what is a small next step that you can take? And I think that the mistakes people make at this point is they just try to do too much. Now, at this point, when we ask people what are the problems that they're experienced or what they do next, they usually say to me, I don't even know where to start, or I'm still afraid. So here's my advice. First of all, if you don't know where to start, find someone you respect and like in the workplace who you can talk about your own behavior. You can say, I need to be better at accepting feedback. What's something I should do differently? Sometimes for this kind of thing, you need a coach or a mentor who you can talk to about things privately and get some feedback for. And that this has worked for me very, very well. The second thing is that I tell people, no perfectionism. Don't wait until things are perfect. Make a small effort, do your best, learn from your mistakes, and try again. So let me check in with Anne and see at this point if she has any comments or questions before we close the webinar.
Thanks, Pat. I'm actually here, believe it or not. Does anybody have any questions for Pat? This was terrific, by the way.
Thank you. Hard-won knowledge from personal experience.
There you go. Yeah. We've had a very quiet group today. I'm not sure why. I tried to spur some action a little bit ago, but I am not seeing any questions, Pat. You must have covered everything.
Yes. Well, I've learned from smart people. What can I say?
There you go. Now, somebody's typing, so I bet you it's a thank you. And several people are typing. Yep, we're getting thank yous in. So, Pat, great job again. You're right. It's from years of experience, so not everyone can give this talk.
Yeah, I tell people that I've experienced enough failures in life that I'm a better presenter for it, because it's like, oh, I've screwed up so many times. I don't want other people to have this. That's how I think of it.
Right. So you're getting thank yous and people who are looking forward to practicing, which is wonderful. So I want to thank everyone for attending. We hope you got something great out of it. And thank you, Pat, for putting together. And we'll see you again soon at another PCI webinar. Have a great afternoon, everybody.